Here we go. Simon, take it away. Simon
Right.
Morris, ladies and gentlemen, of the London Topographical Society, is the kind prime mover in the donation of those wonderful maps that we had posted to us with sheet lines this month. So thanks to Simon, who's publications manager and a council member of the LTS, which membership I would thoroughly recommend to you. He is, of course, a member of ours as well. And I'm very grateful for him not only donating those maps, but giving us this excellent presentation, which I've had the honour of seeing at the Warburg Institute recently. So without further ado, this is being recorded and it will be therefore online within a few days on the Charles Close Society website. So I am now in control of the slides, Simon, and over to
Good.
you.
Good. Right. Let's see the first one, please. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I interest you in this. Now, of course, we're the Charles Close Society for the study of Ordnance Survey Maps. I'm afraid I won't be saying very much about Ordnance Survey Maps. And what I do is not entirely flattering of the Ordnance Survey. We'll come on to that in due course. This is based on the London Parish Maps book that the Society published 5 years ago. And this is absolutely Ralph Hyde's work. Ralph, as many of you will know, was the keeper of maps and engravings at Guildhall Library for many years. He was a great cartobibliographer. He wrote the standard catalogue of London maps, 1851 to 1900. And he handed me the manuscript of this. We were chatting, gosh, about 20 years ago. And he had done a lot of the work in going around and simply cataloguing the parish maps. I think he must have done it perhaps at the same time in the mid-70s as he was writing his other catalogue. Anyhow, I persuaded him to let us publish it, and I got it typed up. And with a group of other members, we divided London up. This is London within the old London County Council, inner London area. We divided London up by modern borough, just for ease. And we went and checked all of the maps there, all of the catalogue entries, and we found lots more maps. And Peter Barber, former head of maps of the British Library, wrote a really good introduction, and the very well-known Lawrence Worms wrote very important bibliographical notes. It's a good book. If anyone wants to buy it, it weighs about 3.5 kilos, but it looks very impressive on your coffee table. One of my colleagues at work, her father was a member of the society, and he distributed them. And when I was chatting to my colleague, Maggie, one morning at work, she said, "Oh, Dad was out delivering the Topographical Society's publications. Aren't they attractive coffee table books?" Goodness, I could have strangled her then and there. Anyhow, this is 477 printed and manuscript maps. These are the London parish maps to 1900, all parishes within the old London County Council area. And there are two key dates. The first key date is 1855, when the Metropolis Management Act was passed, which created the Metropolitan Board of Works. And under it, the parishes were formalized and became civil parishes. I'll come on to that in a moment. And areas that were too small to be a parish on their own were amalgamated into boards of works, as we had, for example, in Lewisham, in Plumstead, in Holborn, Hammersmith and Fulham, and in Wandsworth. And the other key date is 1900. And 1900 was when London became recognizably modern with the creation of the metropolitan, the metropolitan boroughs, which lasted until 1965. And that is when, of course, London parishes no longer published their own maps. May I see the next slide, please? Right, why parish maps? Well, because I think parish maps are very important documents. They're not massively well understood. I hope they're a little better understood now. And what they do is they tell us a lot about parishes. For a start, they can tell us about the parish on its own. The map I'm showing you there is Kensington, showing the water supply and electric light districts. This is Bacon, 1892. The reference is Hyde Parish Map, the book I'm talking about, number 267. And this actually shows Kensington in its context. In other words, it actually shows the London around the area. And what these do is these show us the maps of the parish. and they emphasize, I think, the characteristics and identity of the parish in the way that simply looking at a whole map of London does not. They also tell us about how the parish developed, and this is showing that Kensington, the vestry of St Mary Abbots, Kensington, generated its own electricity in 1892. They were really quite busy, these parishes, much more so than they are now. May I see the next, please? Now, I'm talking about civil parishes, and this is a Stanford map from 1878, and this is marked to show the civil parishes. And if you look at it, you will see, for example, in the southwest, you've got Wandsworth. Now, that is a board of works, because it is the parishes, the sparsely populated parishes of Streatham, Putney, Wandsworth, and so on. Above that, you've got the Lambeth, I beg your pardon, the Fulham Board of Works, which is both the Hammersmith parish and the Fulham parish. But then if you look to Lambeth, which is, as I'm sure you know, immediately to the east of Wandsworth, that is simply all Lambeth, the parish of St Mary's Lambeth, a single parish. And above it, you have got, going back to the other side, you've got Kensington, a single parish of Kensington. In other words, Kensington was large enough to be a formal civil parish. Civil in the sense it has got nothing to do with the Church of England, although the rector of the parish, or vicar of the parish, and the senior church warden were ex officio members of the vestry, and the vestry was the council, the civil council that set the rates, supplied water, connected houses to drainage, maintained the roads, provided rudimentary services. And if you look there, you'll see there are 30 or 40 different parishes and metropolitan boards and boards of works. So that is what we're looking at, the maps of the civil parishes. Next slide, please. And not the ecclesiastical parishes. Now, you ladies and gentlemen know all about them because you've got our nice map of them. And this shows, for example, Chelsea. Now, if you look at Chelsea, which is the pink one, you will see that it is actually, that is the civil parish of Chelsea. The civil parish of St Luke's Chelsea was all of that. And within it, if you were Church of England, you would have had those separate parishes, St Luke's, Christchurch, Park Chapel, St John, Holy Trinity, St Saviour, blah, blah, blah. Those are simply of religious significance if you were Church of England. They wouldn't mean a thing to someone who was a Baptist, someone who was a Roman Catholic, someone who was Jewish. But what would matter to all of you was all the pink area together, because that is the civil parish of Chelsea. That is what would maintain the roads. You would complain to them if your street was not properly lit. You would complain to them if there was some nuisance in your street. So what we're talking about here is absolutely the civil and not the Church of England parishes. May I see the next slide, please? Thank you. And what we're doing here is we are looking at what you might call the maps of the linked villages of London. Now, you'll recall, I'm sure, Stein Air Rasmussen, who was a famous Danish architect who wrote the wonderful book, London, the Unique City, in the early 30s. And as a Dane, he came to London, he saw it through different, maybe Scandinavian eyes. But he made the point that London was unique because it was linked villages, Hampstead, Highgate, Dulwich, Clapham, that had all been linked by the enormous runaway growth of late Georgian and Victorian London, and then interwar London, when the remaining villages were all being linked. And in many ways, you can look at these maps of parishes as the maps of the linked villages before they were linked. On the left, you've got the wonderful Joel Gascoigne maps of Stepney, and you can see there the individual villages of Poplar, of Stepney, of Bethnal Green there before they were linked. And that is a very beautiful map. That is, sorry, I can't see the bottom of my screen, 1903. And then by way of contrast, you've got a map of Streatham. And that shows, again, Streatham before it was built up, Streatham at the beginning of the railway age. And it is a series, not even really of linked villages. It is almost straggly. I'm not being rude in case anyone lives in Streatham, by the way. A series of straggly straggly developments along the roads, which suggest that there was, for some reason, there was no strong nuclear development in Streatham. And these are the parish maps, and these are what I think are so interesting. You can look at them, and you can look at Stepney, the parish of Stepney on its own. You can look at the parish of Streatham on its own, and you can get an idea for the feel of it before it all became the whole agglomeration of London. May I see the next, please? Thank you. Now, there's never an infinite, but there's a very large number of different ways these maps were produced. Sometimes they were manuscript, and in the city of London, which had, if I recall, 109 different parishes, they were very often manuscript. And here is a very attractive manuscript map of St. Thomas Apostle, which is just off Cannon Street, right next to my office. And it would take you about 1.5 minutes to walk from one end of this parish to another. It is so tiny. This was 1872. It's manuscript. It's in the LMA, London Metropolitan Archive. Sorry, this week's name for that is London Archive, I think. I don't yet know next week's name for it. And it's a very attractive little map. But you'll see nearly all of the parish is eaten up by roads. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks of buildings. But it was important to get some proper people, Tress and Innes, if I read correctly, architects and surveyors, to do a survey. First of all, I imagine to see how much or how little of the parish was actually left after a new road might have been built. But secondly, of course, it was very important to delineate the extent of the parish, because that is the limits of your authority. That is where you are responsible for a nuisance. Those are the buildings upon which you may levy a rate, and not the other side of the street, not next door. And these are always important. So you have manuscript like that. You have printed maps. You have some that went into parish histories. Some were issued for use by vestry and the vestryman, I'll show you. Some were for general sale. Hardly any were for street directories, and astonishingly, the only street directory that contained a map of a civil parish was in Islington, because for whatever reason, the area conformed to the civil parish. Lots of other Victorian street directories contain maps. Not a single one of them, as far as I can tell, contains a map of that respective civil parish. So may I see the next, please? There is a pattern of mapping, a chronological pattern, and I illustrate this with a very attractive map. Parish of St. Giles in the Fields in Holborn is by Richard Blome, and this was used to illustrate Stowe's survey of London, a whole series of them. These maps are very idiosyncratic, and this idiosyncrasy, if there is such a word, is very London. London is the unique city, as Steyer Rasmussen said. It is also, I don't know about anarchic, but it is ungovernable. It has never had a uniform government. Even now, it is a bit of a shambles. So there is no date this mapping started. Deptford was first mapped in 1623. Hammersmith, not until 1830. There was no regularity. St. George's Hanover Square was mapped in 1758. And the next map is over a century later in 1875. Chelsea was mapped 102 years gap, or it could be sporadic. Greenwich was only mapped for a period of 10 years. Eltham was only mapped once. But there are some series, for example, Blome did a series of 20 parishes, and some map makers such as Daw, D-A-W, did a whole series of maps of St. Pancras and of Kensington that go over a span of 20 or 30 years. And there are other examples. George Oakley Lucas did a whole series of very high quality, large scale maps of Paddington and of St. Marylebone. So there are some, but these maps tell us something about London. They were issued on the initiative of individual parishes when they wanted to. They did it on their terms. They chose their own map maker. They chose the scale. They chose what to display, and they got on with it. There is no central direction whatsoever. And I think these, we can view, I think in many ways, these parish maps as very illustrative of London and the way London ran itself, or individual parishes chose to operate in the 18th and 19th century. London is the city of laissez-faire. That is why it is the unique city. And I think these maps are indicative of that approach to laissez-faire. Next, please. Right. Now, I illustrated with quite a nice map. This is a map of the parish of St Mary Lambeth. This is published by Stanford. Stanford and Wild and Bacon did a lot of these maps, particularly Bacon, because Bacon has such a good base map in his large-scale 9 3/8 map of London. Stanford had a very good base map in the shape of his 6 inches to the mile. And this is Lambeth in 1886. This is a very municipal map because it is coloured by ward. And the wards would have been of interest basically to the vestryman. I am a vestryman for Norwood Ward. I would like to have a map that shows me what is in Norwood Ward and what isn't, and where are the other councillors' wards. And this is also a very distinctive parish map. Like a lot of them, it only shows the parish. It notes in handwriting, oh, up there is the parish of Camberwell, down there is something called the parish of Clapham, but they don't exist as far as the map is concerned. They're just names. No streets are shown. And if we look at the pattern of mapping, the spatial one, there are 120 parish maps in the City of London because there's so many parishes. There's 70 in Westminster, between 30 to 40 in Camden, Islington, Southwark, Tower Hamlets, 21 to 26 in places like Hackney and Kensington, 15 in Greenwich, and 12 in Lewisham. In other words, the density of mapping is most concentrated in the centre, and it's like contours. The contours go out and get lower and lower and lower as you get further from the centre, probably because they were less inhabited, probably because there was less demand for these maps, and that is fairly consistent. But that gives you the impression of the best part of 500 maps, nearly half are City of London, City of Westminster, and the balance elsewhere. So may I see the next map and the next slide, please? Now, as I was saying when we were looking at that little parish map in the city, boundaries are massively important. And I illustrate this with a manuscript. This is not a parish map. This is a manuscript, a description and plan of the boundary line of the parish of Clapham in the county of Surrey, as it was ascertained and settled by a committee of the vestry, 27th of October, 1806. And this copy belonged, it seems, to the vestry clerk. And this is a little booklet in manuscript. And this is a perambulation of the boundary. And look how accurate it is. I illustrated with just one page. They have gone round and they put in measurements and they say this land belongs to, oh goodness me, I think it's Emmanuel College, presumably in Cambridge. Clapham, that is part of Hyde Farm, that is Blackhall Farm, that is somebody else's bit, and that bit over there is Streatham, so we don't talk about them. And it was so important to get this precisely right, because this is marking your territory. This is marking your responsibility. If there was a poor family and you could push them over into Streatham, it means you were not responsible for it. And if they were in Clapham, you probably had to relieve them. It shows who paid the rates and who didn't. It shows which streets you were responsible for providing what was then have been fairly rudimentary services, the removal of waste, the maintenance of the streets, later on public health and so on. So I think these maps are probably accurate. They're accurate because they were wanted to be accurate, and they were accurate because they were produced for a local market, which would have got hold of the map and scrutinized it immediately. Is this correct? No, it isn't. Go and put it right. And on many occasions, when a map is commissioned, the draftsman would lay a draft before a committee of the vestry, and the committee of the vestry would go away maybe for a couple of months to decide, is this accurate enough for us? May I see the next one, please? These maps may also be what was the earliest accurate local map. And I illustrate this with a very attractive map, Parish of St. James's, Westminster, which is all around Piccadilly. It is by George Thompson. And we know nothing at all about the making of this map, because although I have looked in all of the vestry and council minutes for all of these maps, trying to, except for the city where Ralph Hyde had done that for me, try to find out the backstory of these maps. I can't find out anything about this map. But this particular one, I think, belonged to the vestry because it's got markings on it that you can't actually see them in this image, which suggests that it was in use by the vestry to mark out drains or sewers. And this predates the Ordnance Survey. I haven't checked. I fancy it may possibly be based on, or at least nod towards, Horwood, which would have been a fairly recent map. But I reckon it is accurate, and I can assert it's accurate. Sorry, I'm speaking like a lawyer now, because the minutes, the vestry minutes, record what I was saying just now. The draftsman, Thompson, laid it before a committee of the vestry who sat on it for a couple of months and then came back and was satisfied it was accurate and decided to pay him. And so these maps are very often the first accurate map of the parish. May I see the next slide, please? Are they unique? Yes and no. No, they're not unique, because the other great cities of Europe have something comparable. The three great cities of 19th century Europe were, I mean, you can argue one way or another. I think they're probably London, Paris, and Vienna. And certainly Donald Olson's wonderful City, The City as a Work of Art, Yale University Press, 1986. May I recommend it to all of you, if you haven't already got it on your shelves, gives those as the three cities. In Paris, yes, there are lots and lots of maps of individual arrondissements. And that is a map I have taken from, sorry, I got to move my screen, the Atlas Pittoresque de Paris by Garnot, 1835. And that is showing the Quartier des Lombards, one of the four quarters that made up one of the pre-1860 arrondissements. And on the left, you've got a map by Artaria, the very well-known Vienna map maker, showing the 8th district, Josefstadt, which is in the center of, or towards the center. But yes, so okay, these two cities, and I can probably go out and find some more, certainly had local maps, but they are completely different from the London maps I'm talking about, because these always form part of a series. The Vienna map, Artaria published a complete set of all of these maps. It makes it look as if they were centrally commissioned. Certainly Paris, that is from an atlas, and there were, if I recall, 12 arrondissements, and there are therefore 48 maps in that atlas. And there are surprisingly many more atlases of Paris, and of Paris broken down by districts, than there are of London. In fact, London did not produce its first atlas, as far as I'm aware, until 1851, when Collins produced an atlas which was not a complete atlas, but just sort of showed vignettes of various parts of London. So yes, these maps are unique, these parish maps, because they're produced locally and idiosyncratically. But no, they're not unique, because other cities, of course, have local maps, and British cities do. You can find some individual maps of some of the outer boroughs of Birmingham from 1890s, and there will, I'm sure, be others you, ladies and gentlemen, will know about. May I see the next slide, please? What do they show? Lots of things: boundaries, wards, land ownership, health, disease, soils, sewers. Let's have a look at them. Next, please. The first thing they usually don't show is land ownership. It is unusual for British maps to show land ownership. Much less usual than if you look at maps, for example, in Argentina, where every single map of this period will almost invariably show land ownership. This is unusual. This is a very attractive Ashpittel map of the parish of St. John at Hackney. And it shows, and if you look at the inset on the left, it shows by initial who owned what. WDT is the Tyson, Thyssen family, if I recall correctly. There's a key on the left-hand side of the map, which I'm sorry, you obviously won't be able to read at this distance, nor can I. But this is unusual in showing land ownership, and how that was obtained, I don't know. Possibly from the terrier that went with the tithe redemption survey. I put a question mark there because I think tithe redemption in Hackney was later than 1831, but we're coming on to that in a moment, so we can have another look. So that is unusual to show land ownership. There's also unusually a land ownership map of Paddington. Otherwise, they are unique. Next, please. This is cheerful. They show death and disease. And this is St. Leonard Shoreditch, Hector Gavin, 1850, and St. Mary Newington, which is down near Elephant and Castle, 1895. Now, the Gavin is from the Royal Commission on Sanitary Matters in London. He also wrote Ramblings of a Sanitary Health Inspector, which is more interesting than it sounds. And this is a parish map, and it shows by darkness the incidence of cholera, if I recall. And this was before cholera was, this is on the cusp, 1850, of cholera being properly understood. The map on the right, St Mary Newington was a tiny parish, but it had very sophisticated medical mapping. And there's a whole series of maps showing the incidence of diphtheria, of whooping cough, of scarlet fever, and other jolly things. And these were published for a whole number of years. And if you're interested, I think you can find them on the Wellcome Institute website, or at least some of them. Otherwise, you've got to trot off to Southwark Local History Library and look at them. But they show how a parish map, these parishes you can view as fairly archaic things, were put to recognizably modern usage. And there are more. There is a cholera map in Islington, which tries to say that decent people who live on the higher parts of Islington, as I do in Barnesbury, weren't affected by cholera, whereas the hoi polloi who lived in the lower bits along Essex Road and City Road were affected by cholera, and it was all to do with the clouds in the air. And that is obviously completely wrong, and that is one of the views that was being held, and you can follow it on a parish map, which is rather interesting. May I see the next, please? Thank you. Jerry, can you just remind me by voice, what slide number am I on? Because I can't see it here, so I want to make sure I'm not overrunning.
Oops. Sorry, I've just knocked my mover thing. I can't tell you that.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I think I know roughly where I am. May I see the next slide, please? Soil and drainage is something else that's shown, and this is a very unusual map. This is from Thomas Allen's History. Here's an example of parish maps being used to illustrate history, showing the soil, and I believe that is one of the first soil maps ever published, I believe, but I haven't looked into it. On the right is Plan of Lewisham showing the roads and sewers. This is an enormous map. It's about 2 meters square, normally cut vertically into two and rolled by John Carleen, who was the surveyor of the Lewisham Board of Works, meaning all the parishes around the Lewisham area. And this shows meticulously the different kinds of sewers, the different kinds of manhole, the different kinds of drain. It is very, very detailed, and it's based on the Ordnance Survey map. And Lewisham was a great purchaser, come back to this, of Ordnance Survey. May I see the next, please? And you ended up quite often with very functional maps. These are two Bacon maps. Bacon, as I say, based these on his 9 3/8 inch, if I recall, survey of London. No fresh surveying was done for this. And the map of St Pancras on the left, 1889, very businesslike, no frills, shows the surrounding area, by the way, and it's coloured by ward. Map on the right, precisely the same for Camberwell, shows the wards, shows the surrounding countryside, the surrounding streets. These are functional. These are the kinds of maps that were made for the vestryman, made for council workers to use on a day-to-day basis. And St Pancras were great purchasers of Bacon maps. They would get through hundreds each year. So they marked them up to show this, that, or the third municipal purpose. May I see the next slide, please? Thank you. And you get lots of different versions. I call this one penny plain, tuppence coloured. And these are examples of maps used to illustrate books. This is both Clerkenwell, which, as you know, is between Islington and the city. It's now part of Islington. The one on the one on the right is the 1828 parish of Clerkenwell from the history of Clerkenwell, and it is illustrated, as you so often get with the churches. It is embellished because it is meant to look pretty. So you have the map as large as you can accommodate on the sheet, and you fill the blank bits with the local buildings, which in this case were churches. The one on the left is from Pink's Parish of Clerkenwell, 1865. And this shows the streets surrounding and therefore doesn't have any space for churches, but again is coloured. And these are both from books, although the one on the left was available for separate sale, though I must say I've never come across one as a separate map. May I see the next, please? And there are three more types of map. First of all, next, please, you had tithe redemption maps. Now, these maps were drawn up. There are normally three manuscript copies. One was for the tithe commissioners, one was for the bishop, and one was for the clergyman, who would be either the victor or the rector of the parish. And these were done by civil parish, not ecclesiastical parish. And you've normally got two or three copies surviving, one of which is in the National Archives, one of which will be in the County Record Office, and one of which might be in the local history library. And these are very good because these are pretty accurate, I reckon. And they're very often the first large-scale map of the area. You've got Fulham, 1843, around Fulham Palace on the top left. Then you've got two Hackney maps, the Rectory of West Hackney and the Rectory of Hackney, because they were done separately. They're 1843. You see, they're 12 years later than Ashby-Tell. So I don't think Ashby-Tell would have got his land information off the terrier that accompanied these. And there you've got De Bever Square in De Bever Town on the left, and on the right you have got, sorry, I can't see without my glasses, Abney Park Cemetery. And on the bottom left, you've got Eltham, 1839, and that is the only map of Eltham Parish. So if you want to know what did Eltham look like before the Ordnance Survey got there, I guess around the 1850s, 1860s, I'm sure someone can correct me, there you have it. And what you also have in the right-hand top right is a parochial assessment map. And this is a map that looks so similar to the parish maps, but is different because this is done for rating purposes rather than tithe redemption purposes. And there you have a very attractive map of Fulham, not in brilliant condition, because I think that's been knocked about a bit in the before it was ended up in the local history library. So these tithe maps and parochial assessment maps are very much part of what we're looking at. May I see the next, please? Oh, we knew we'd get there. Ordnance Survey. And I illustrate this with a map from the Ordnance Survey fan club that was Lewisham Board of Works. This is an atlas of 12 sheets, maps of the parish of Lewisham and the hamlet of Penge, constituting the Lewisham district by John Carleen, 1875. And I can say by John Carleen because the parish minutes record that he actually updated this. He added about 200 or 400 separate streets before it was published. So this is a very accurate map. And the 60-inch map was available from about 1848. And the Metropolitan Board of Works wrote to each council, each vestry, saying, why don't you use Ordnance Survey maps? They're very good value and they're quite cheap. And the vestries did. If they wanted a one-off map, they would tend to purchase a whole series of Ordnance Survey maps, join them up, mount them on cloth, and presumably keep them on a roller. And for example, Chelsea Vestry needed a map of where its sewers were and where the manholes were, which were kept in the foreman knew where they were, but the vestry said, well, look, we can't just always rely on the foreman. So they bought a set of Ordnance Survey maps and they pasted them up and they marked up the sewers on them. I haven't seen that map. I think it's probably disappeared, but I know about it from the vestry minutes. And there must be several dozen occasions where that happened. Now, 24 vestries purchased maps based on the Ordnance Survey and would actually have used them. Lewisham was the key example. Most Lewisham maps were Ordnance Survey, not otherwise. And the reason not otherwise is that I think there are three reasons. Firstly, the scale was not very convenient for a council, because if a council wanted a pocket map, a map that folded and could be taken into the field, the enormous Ordnance Survey scale made it difficult. Secondly, there was inertia. Before the Ordnance Survey, the councils, the vestries were already dealing with Wild or Stamford or similar, and they just kept on. They were very stuck in the mud. And thirdly, the Ordnance Survey moved at its own pace. And the best example, I think, is St. George's, Hanover Square. In 1868, they said To the Ordnance Survey, can we please purchase one of your maps that we wish to use? We wish to reduce, and the vestryman will use it. And the Ordnance Survey wrote, well, yes, you can if you like, but it won't be very satisfactory if you reduce it because it's such a large scale. Okay. Yes, the Ordnance Survey continued, we'll give you an engraved copy in about 6 months, but I'm afraid we won't have any copies available for you to purchase for quite some considerable time. In 1871, the St. George at Hanover Square actually tried to order something. The Ordnance Survey replied, well, yes, we'll take your order and we'd like the money, please, but we can't give any date for when these maps will actually be published. In other words, the Ordnance Survey was not massively interested in small orders from these vestries, and that is why there are relatively few Ordnance Survey maps. May I move on, please? And I would just add, not a parish map, but an estate map is another important source for understanding why buildings look like that on the ground. And I illustrate this with two. One of the estate of Elaine's College, Dulwich, which still very much defines the area. And secondly, a plan of the Sandhills estate in St Pancras, more or less where St Pancras Station, just south of St Pancras Station. And if you want to know why is Dulwich so uniformly, homogeneously, frankly pleasant, that map tells you a lot. If you want to know why you've got those streets, quite a lot of which have survived, south of the new road, now Euston Road, you'd look at that map. And I think you need to look at parish maps alongside, I beg your pardon, estate maps alongside parish maps to get a feel for why areas do or do not develop in a certain way. Can I move on, please? Let us look at how these got made and published. And I take as my example the wonderful Thompson map of the parish of St Pancras, such an attractive map, 1804. In 1792, the vestry said, we want a survey because we haven't got an accurate survey. We need to know, again, we need to know what are our responsibilities. We need to know what has been built. We need to make sure we're rating, this is what they'd have thought, all the areas. And they engaged a surveyor called Prickett. 1796, Prickett commenced work. 1798, Prickett was running out of steam and he had joined up with John Thompson, another surveyor, and they attended the vestry with the part completed map. And here we go again, a committee of the vestry checked the accuracy of the map. They took it away and studied it and would have walked around with it. Again, it shows that these, I think, can be relied upon. 1801, it was finally completed. The vestry accepted it and Thompson was given 150 guineas. 1804, this map was published. Look how slow it is. 1792, the vestry wanted it to happen. 1804, the map was published. It makes HS2 look as if it's proceeding quickly. 1809, goodness knows why, Thompson came back to the vestry and said, thank you for the 150 guineas. Can I have a bit more money, please? I think the answer probably ended with off. I leave it to suggest, consider the first word. But what is interesting is that when Thompson wrote to the vestry, he said how much work had gone into this. 363 days to survey all of St Pancras. And St Pancras runs, or ran, from approximately, what shall I say? Approximately Coram Fields, which was the old children's orphanage, right up to Highgate. So it's quite a lot, nearly 3 solid years' work, 363 days' work. And then 392 days to update it, engrave it, and try to find subscribers. And I find that interesting. There are, as you all know, there are statistics published by the Ordnance Survey of how many men it took to survey such and such an area, whether it's in Ireland or in Scotland or in England. And I find that very useful in enabling us to look at a map and get a feel for how long does it actually take to survey. So if somebody produces a map and says that was surveyed in a year or in a month, you can look at these figures and think, yeah, that's credible, or no, hang on, that must largely be copied from somebody else's work. So I find this kind of information very interesting. May I see the next, please? Kensington. Now, this is 2 inscriptions from the Edmund Dawes map of the parish of St Mary Abbots, Kensington. The one on the left, you'll see, is dedicated to the archdeacon. The one on the right is dedicated to the vestry. In other words, between the left, 1863, and the right, 1879, Daw got the vestry to sponsor and pay for it. How do we get there? In 1846, the first survey, Daw showed the map to Kensington, and they weren't interested. But he showed it to St Pancras, and the vestry of St Pancras purchased his map of the vestry of Kensington. 1856, Daw went back to the vestry of Kensington and said, I will correct the map and I'll give a copy to each vestryman for £15. Nah, not interested, said Kensington. 1863, he sent a new addition to the vestry. Would you like it? Nah, go away, they said. 1870, Daw wrote to the vestry and offered to resurvey and to give them 100 copies for £30. Shove off, said the vestry. He carried on. He was very determined, that man. 1878, he wrote again, would you like my nice map? And I'll dedicate it to you. And they said yes. And they bought 150 for £50. So that shows how a surveyor would recognize that the vestry was potentially his largest client and would keep on pestering them until he got somewhere. And he got somewhere in the end. And the same happened with George Oatley Lucas in relation to the vestry of St Marylebone, where he published the map privately to start off with, eventually getting orders many years later from the vestry. May I see the next, please? If that's how you handle the vestry, this is how you mishandle it. I illustrate this with, again, this is Bacon, map of the parish of Chelsea, taken, note the word taken, from Bacon's 18-sheet map of London. This is the 1887 edition. And by taken, read stolen, because it was nicked. This is, again, a folding map. This is based on the Bacon map. And this shows, interestingly, it shows Chelsea with a bit of the few of the surrounding streets, and the bit of Chelsea that was right up in Kensal Town, Kensal Green, it was floating as a little island. And what happened is that 1887, the vestry bought 500 of these maps from Cook, Hammond and Kell. And Mr. Bacon was not amused because he discovered it had been pirated, and he wrote to the vestry, it has come to my attention that you have traced, copied and printed our 9-inch London map for the Chelsea vestry map. This map is our copyright, and I cannot, of course, allow it to be copied by anyone. It costs me a very large sum to revise and engrave these London maps, and I must protect the copyright. I'm greatly surprised at such a proceeding. I await your reply before taking further steps. Perhaps I should add that all I require is a reasonable compensation, the effacing of the map from the stone, and the delivery of all copies in hand to me. And I shall also require to know the number printed. Anyhow, the Chelsea vestry went cap in hand, gave him £5, surrendered the stone, gave up all copies, and then proceeded to engage Mr. Bacon to produce further editions. And this again is, I think, quite a nice little story of showing how the vestry and the mapmaker had a symbiotic, although on this occasion, a rather antagonistic relationship. May I see the next one, please? This is just one example. The parishes of St Giles in the Field and St George, Bloomsbury. They were too small to be separate, so they were rolled up into the Holborn Board of Works. In the one on the left, 1866, at that time, the parish was still using an 1815 rating map. So in other words, it was about 50 years old. And they commissioned a new one from George Mayer for 250 guineas. And Edward Weller, the well-known mapmaker, engraved it half size. And that is one of the engraved half size copies. It's attractive. It has got some of the churches engraved. It is decorative. The one on the right is by John Izard, who's another quite well-known surveyor. He approached the vestry in 1890 saying he was working in the area. Would they like him to update Mayer's map? And they said, actually, no, can you do a new survey? And they paid him 75 guineas for it, and he was then given another 25 guineas. The original was framed and hung in the vestry boardroom, and then there were 100 copies made, one for each member. So that gives you some idea. There's probably about 100 of those made. Why the vestry paid 250 guineas for one and 100 guineas for the other, I can't say. Maybe the one on the right is slightly less decorative than the one on the left. But that shows how a vestry will just shop around and go to whatever map maker it thinks is going to do the best job of it at the time. And the next, please. A very short point. Where you have got long runs of these maps, and as I mentioned, Edmund Dorr did a long run in Kensington, you can use it to track development. And here, side by side, are the 1863 and 1879 maps. Look how it grew. Look how Notting Hill grew. And this is simply a period of 16 years. But this was boom time in London. And look how much it shot up. It leapt forward by a mile in that direction. I think this can be relied upon as reasonably accurate. There's never going to be a substitute from looking at the rate books or looking at the district surveyor's returns if you really want to know. But visually and quickly, this is made by the man who is trying to persuade the vestry to buy his map. I think you can be reasonably confident that will be pretty accurate and pretty up to date, or he would have been laughed out of court. And it's worth remembering that 1879 one is the one the vestry actually purchased. So they must have been pretty pleased with it. May I see the next, please? The map at work. This is the same parish. This is by courtesy of Daniel Crouch, of Daniel Crouch Rare Books, who has this for sale. This is actually the vestry surveyor's copy of the very same map. And it is marked up in manuscript to show, if I recall, street cleaning districts. This is so vestry, having a little manuscript note tacked on, held on by sealing wax. You can see it there, showing what are the roads, what are the numbers, and what are the days they're cleaned on. And you can see it's coloured in crayon to mark that up. I think that shows how much these are municipal maps, and they were made when not obviously produced to illustrate a book. They're made very much for municipal purposes. And here is such a good example. I'm really grateful to Daniel for letting me use this. Such a good example of a map being used municipally. Right, next please. Let us polish off the Mapper's Showcase. This is the most beautiful map I've come across. This is the plan of the parish of Clerkenwell, 1813 by Horner. This was done by a patent printing method. We discuss it in the catalogue. And it's wonderful. It shows Clerkenwell as an lit hill and in the uplands, like in the Alps, surrounded by great valleys. I walk that way every day to work, and I can promise you it's really nothing like that, but it is so attractive. It's a beautiful rendering of the parish, so imaginative, and it has got such a nice vignette at the bottom of the old Sessions House and all around Clerkenwell Green. That is possibly the most attractive of these maps I have come across. May I see the next, please? And the map would very often showcase the locale. On the left, you've got the, I think possibly the first map of St. George's, Hanover Square, which is 1858. And the map is tiny. It's nearly all embellishment, but that is a serious map. That is an accurate map of the parish, and it's really focusing on the churches. And the other maps would very often seek to showcase the locale. Above, you've got Parish of Christchurch, Surrey. Below, you've got Hammersmith Bridge, which is from Slater's map. And then you've got the one I showed you just now, the United Parishes of George and St. George from Dovy's History. And that has got engravings of the hospital, of King George, and of several of one of the churches and another statue. And it is almost advertising or showcasing the area. May I see the next, please? And that, to my mind, bespeaks of municipal pride. Here is another city parish. This was printed 1853. This is St. Mary le Quern. Again, there's hardly any of it left. It's nearly all roads. You've got Newgate Street and, oh gosh, wish my eyesight was better, Cheapside and St. Martin's le Grand. And it's nearly all taken up with streets. And again, you could walk around it in about 5 minutes flat. And it has got such an attractive bird's eye view of this tiny parish there. And so this is both a map and a showcase. This speaks to accuracy, because this is actually commissioned by the parish and it's been undertaken by surveyors. It's got the church, it's got a bit of the history, and it has got, as a wonderful embellishment, the bird's eye view. May I see the next, please? And then it comes to an end, the end of the parishes. The parishes ended in 1900, and thereafter you have plans of the new boroughs. And this is what you could call a give and take map. This is the parish of St James Clerkenwell. And I think on the other side is Luke's Old Street. And it is marked up to show red, the bits that are being given to the new borough of Finsbury, and blue, the bits that are being given to it by adjacent parishes. And the reason it is being done is to iron out the differences, and to, or maybe it's the other way around, my reds and my greens, sorry. And the reason it is being done is to iron out the differences and to make it more logical and rational. There would have been these maps for every single parish, every single borough. The only ones I've come across are this and the borough, former parish, the borough of St Marylebone. And this is really the obituary notice, you might say, of the parishes, showing how the parishes were carved up to form the metropolitan boroughs, which were in due time amalgamated and carved up to form the current London boroughs, some of which are much the same. Lambeth, for example, is still substantively the old parish of St Mary. Lambeth, Islington, together with Finsbury, is still substantively the old parish of St Mary, Islington. Anyhow, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a quick canter through London Parish Maps to 1900. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be more than happy to have a conversational discussion or answer questions as you wish.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent and just as brilliant despite our crotchety start. I'd like to thank you for sussing out what had gone wrong with the Zoom invitations. Look at all this applause that's happening.
Oh, nice.
Thank you very much. There's so many wonderful parts of that. I'd just like to say fantastic this time, and I don't want to stand in the way of anyone who wants to ask you questions. The detail, the colouring, the panache of these map makers was just absolutely astonishing, and I'm so grateful to you for making it. We had over 30 colleagues with us this evening, and I'd like to invite anyone to ask questions by raising a hand is probably the best. And I can see Rob is top of the pile. Rob Wheeler.
Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I noticed with the plan of St Michael le Quern and also your Cannon Street city parish,
yes,
that you had houses that were straddling the parish boundary. If you engaged yourself as a servant for 12 months to the householder, in which parish did you gain a settlement? And does it depend on any topographical detail? And do any of the parish maps try to provide that detail?
I don't think it would. I think it would be a matter of parochial law and local custom. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. If your house was straddled two parishes, it might be you're jointly rated by them. I must confess, in my ignorance, I don't know the answer to that one.
Oh, I think you were jointly rated, yes.
And you probably had settlement in both parishes.
Right.
Does that satisfy you, Rob?
Thank you very much.
Richard Oliver has a question. Ask to unmute, it says.
Yes. Very quick point. In showing the map of Hackney, you said that it's very unusual to have records of land ownership on maps. I suggest it's unusual, certainly, of printed maps of London, and most printed street type maps elsewhere in the country, but there is one group of maps which does tend to have quite a bit of land ownership information on, and that's the series produced by John Wood between about 1815 and 1845. He produced considerable numbers in Scotland and considerable numbers in England and Wales, and he was written up by what was his name? Brian Thingamy in the Cartographic Journal about 2015. Brian Robson, who died shortly afterwards, in the Cartographic Journal about 2015.
Yeah.
But I agree, generally it's unusual to advertise land ownership on printed maps.
Yeah. Richard, I'm very grateful for the point. I recall you making precisely the same point to me about 10 years ago in Glasgow, when I think you were giving a talk, or there was a really good map conference at the Mitchell, I think it was the Mitchell Library. I forget.
I've never given a talk in Glasgow.
Ah.
So it must have been somebody else.
Yeah, there is that language difficulty, of course. But I asked, it was a lecture on Scottish maps, and I actually remember making the point to say, well, I think these maps are unusual because they give land ownership names. This is really unusual. I think you very kindly pointed out in response to my question, you weren't speaking, I think you were in the audience. No, it wasn't that unusual. It is relatively unusual in my experience. I will obviously defer to your far greater knowledge, happily, but it is pretty unusual. And I must say, of all the London local maps, that is the only printed map I recall which gives land ownership. The one I mentioned of Paddington is a manuscript map.
Yes, quite agree.
Thank you, Richard. And do we have any other questions, please? Jeff Fairburn.
Thanks for a great talk there. Very interesting. You mentioned that the rector and the senior church warden would have been ex officio on the vestries. Would that have been from 1855, I take it? But what about as the ecclesiastical parishes kept getting subdivided as the population increased? Oh, how would that have worked?
They were two separate. They're running on two separate tracks. From 1855, the Metropolitan Board of Works basically recognised the mother parish to be the civil parish. So it would be the mother parish in Hackney, St John at Hackney, the mother parish in Islington, St Mary Islington, the mother parish in Kensington, St Mary Abbot. And it would have been the vicar, and if I recall correctly, the vicar and senior church warden of each parish, who would ex officio have sat on the vestry. And there might be a dozen other parishes being constantly divided and created as new buildings were built. They were nothing to do with this. Those were purely ecclesiastical parishes.
I see. So that they didn't have representation, only the original parish.
Yeah. The original parish, and it would have been a vestry. And I think under the Metropolis Management Act, they would be what's called open vestries, which I think was every male, I don't think female, every male ratepayer above a certain level was eligible to vote, I think.
Oh, right. Thank you. Also, can I ask, you said the give and take map you showed at the end. Did you say there was one for each parish? I didn't quite catch that.
Well, there would have been. There are, I can think of some. There is one for Camberwell, I know, which was issued to vestrymen, of course, they're published copies. There was that map I showed just now of making up the borough of Finsbury, which was clearly printed, but I think it was printed in small numbers only for vestry use. And there was the one of St Marylebone, which again I think was a sheet printed, I think probably just for vestry use, maybe a dozen copies run off for the surveyors or what have you. There probably are others. I have not come across them. They have not survived in any of the local collections or central collections.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And any more questions? I can see a real live hand being waved by Andy. Take it away, Andy. Unmute.
Thank you. Hi there. Thanks. Great talk. Just a quick question, rather prosaic question probably, but in a situation where you've got parishes commissioning maps as opposed to the situation you cited for Vienna, where it's there centrally commissioned, if you like. Do the boundaries always line up, or were there any clashes or situations where there were disputes over where the lines actually lay? In other words, if you put all the parish maps together, would you get a complete map of London in like jigsaw pieces?
Well, yes, you would, subject to 2 points. Firstly, they would not have been mapped on the common meridian, so they will be a rather ill-fitting jigsaw. There will be inaccuracies in that respect. Secondly, yes, there were definitely occasional boundary disputes, and that is why you had the beating of the bounds on, I think, Ascension Day, where the vicar and the church warden, this is the ecclesiastical parishes as much as anything, would go out and beat the bounds, and that was then taken over by the vestries, the ones we're talking about. And there would sometimes be disputes. For example, if you were in Southwark and part of the River Neckinger fell in or dried up, was that part of the parish of Rotherhithe or the parish of Southwark? And you'd need to sort that out. Or if some land was reclaimed, which parish did it belong to? So there would occasionally be boundary disputes. But unlike, for example, a map of showing the Andes, which will show disputed territory between Argentina and Chile, none of these maps shows disputed territory, I'm afraid, interesting and engaging though that would be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy, I beg your pardon. And any more for any more? If you can raise an electronic hand, it pops you to the top of my pile, which is useful. And so has done Fraser Donaghy. Fraser, please unmute and take it away.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, thank you, Simon, for an excellent talk. The Ordnance Survey parish plans had books of reference, which would provide information on land use. Is that something that also exists for the parish plans in general, or is it a rarity?
It's a rarity. One or two exist. Thomson, in his map of St Pancras, published a terrier. And there are 2 or 3 manuscript copies at St Pancras, and there's a printed copy, if I recall, in the Bodleian. Most didn't. And his terrier was only of the country parts of St Pancras, not of the town parts. The town parts, I imagine, you could have looked up in the rate books. Most of these did not include terriers and paid no attention to land ownership. Ashbittle in Hackney is exceptional. In 1831, there's no I can find no record in vestry minutes of how Ashbittle came to make the map. So I think that it's fairly unusual to have terriers. There are 1 or 2, and the one that immediately springs to mind is the Thompson one from about 1800, 1805.
Thank you very much. Most interesting.
Thank you, Fraser. Thank you, Fraser.
Jerry, I can smell my supper burning downstairs. Can I have perhaps just one more question, please?
Could I just ask you very quickly, was it the Ashbittle map of St John at Hackney which London Topographical Society published?
No,
it was another one.
I don't think it's ever been. I don't think you might be thinking of the map of Stepney.
Possibly, very possibly. Can I once again, if you have to leave us, thank you on behalf of I think it was 33 members.
Very happy, thank you.
Enjoyed your talk, and I shall never forget the feeling of what does one do when one can't find your speaker. But you and I thought of the solution to that at exactly the same time. It was extraordinary. But thank you so much. Enough of that. Can I, you've got lots of applause going on here and hands waving about. I love the way they fly across the screen now.
Very nice. Thank you all very much.
But
thank you.
Absolutely well done. Go and have your supper. I'm just going to remind people that on January the Rob, what was the date? Monday the 12th of January in the new year of 2026, Dr. Rob Wheeler is going to give us a talk on the Bartholomew half-inch series, and what the plates can tell us of the maps. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Rob, or have I got it right?
I don't think so. I shall be saying a little bit about the early history of the England and Wales half-inch series, which this is primarily about. Scotland is rather complicated.
Okay, thank you. And later on in the new year, we'll have Stuart Dennison back with us, doing another railway, not a show and tell, but a full-blown presentation on Irish and Scottish railway maps. Is that correct?
Just Scotland, Jerry.
Just Scotland. We're redressing the balance because England and Wales copped the lot last time. I'd like to wrap up quickly and go away and have a stiff scotch and recover from having to learn a script I haven't tried to learn earlier on. But thank you for your patience at 8 o'clock. It was an interesting experience, not having one speaker there and seemingly no way of raising them. But thank you very much. Can I wish you all a very happy Christmas or Christmas season, as you will. And I hope you enjoy Simon Morris's other society, Christmas present. And we look forward sometime before too long doing our own map from the past again. But I'm not going to tempt fate by talking further about that. Except good to see you all, and thanks for coming. See you again in January. Cheerio.